Hello, and welcome to our webinar on the wonderful world of water rides. Today, we're going to dive into the details of these favorites of amusement parks and theme parks around the world and ask the question, why or why not water rides? In a world where trends come and go, water rides have had a special place in our hearts for decades. And we're going to be discussing why do we find ourselves drawn to the excitement and splashes they offer, and why, despite their popularity, do theme parks find them a little challenging? This topic can be a little divisive, so this is going to be an interesting conversation for sure. My name is Kelly Saul, and I'm the manager of the Water Rides division here at Whitewater. Whitewater, you gasp. Aren't you the water slide company? Yes, yes, we are. But we also have a small but mighty team that designs, manufactures, and delivers a whole range of water rides around the globe. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by a panel of experts who are going to weigh in on this question of why or why not. First is Dennis Speigel, founder and CEO of International Theme Park Services. Dennis is an industry legend, past IAPA chairman, Hall of Famer, and all-around great guy. Next is Jonathan Smith, corporate VP Rides and Engineering at SeaWorld Parks and Entertainment. No doubt currently very busy getting a whole slate of new coasters up and running. Jonathan's expertise in park planning and design has given him unique insights into the delicate balance between thrilling water rides and park operations. Finally, we have Gerard Pasqua, Director of Technical and Safety for Vin Wonders in Vietnam, a renowned hospitality veteran with extensive experience at major parks in the US and Asia. Gerard brings great perspectives on the challenges faced by theme parks when it comes to water rides. We're grateful for Gerard joining us today as it's very late in the evening in his part of the world. So throughout this discussion, we're going to dive into some history of some famous water rides, share some stories from the field, and explore what makes these rides special. But we won't shy away from the reality of these rides either. If there's issues, we're going to bring them up. We aim to entertain and inform. So get your ponchos on, buckle up, keep your hands and feet inside the ride at all times. Our chat line is open, I should say, so you can drop your questions in there. My colleague Harmony sitting here, she's going to collect the best questions and let us know about them at the end, and we'll save about 10 minutes for addressing some of your questions. So without further ado, let's get to it. And I'm going to ask each of our panel in turn a little bit more about who they are and their connections to water rides, and maybe let us know about their favorite water ride. So we'll start with you, Dennis.
Well, thanks, Kelly, Jonathan, Gerard. Great to be with you guys today. Appreciate it. My history is long and certainly been around the industry for more than a lot of people will remember. I started out at Coney Island here in Cincinnati, which was the Coney Island of the Midwest, named after Coney Island, New York. And it was one of the parks that Walt Disney came to many times during his study and review of building Disneyland. He became very good friends with the owners of the park, the Schatz and the Wachs family. And that park led to the development of the King's Parks, Kings Island, King's Dominion, Canada's Wonderland, Carowinds, and Great America. We owned all of those at one time. My history with the water rides goes back to Coney Island. We had a great ride at Coney Island, Kelly, called the Lost River. And it was a tunnel of love, if you will. And it was where all the young teens went to kiss and make out during their school visit to Coney Island. So one of the fun things about this ride was that they didn't know. As you went through the channels of the ride, and before you went up the big dip to go down the dip into the run out, it was very dark in there, of course, tunnel of love. And there was an older gentleman who sat there for years, and he had a cane. And he would, when they came around, and if they were petting or making out a little too much, he'd hit them in the head with the cane. He'd crack them on the head, and they were, what in the world's going on? They didn't know what was happening.
Live animatronic chaperone.
That was right. Long before animatronics. So
could we say the Tunnel of Love is one of your favorite water rides then?
Yeah, I had a little fun in there, I have to say. But so that's kind of my history. We had one of the first log flumes which we'll talk about in a little bit, an aero log flume at Coney Island, which we put in the mid '60s. So always had an affinity for water and for rides that are associated with water, whether they're in a dry or a wet park.
Great. All right, move on to Jonathan. Tell us a little bit about your history with water rides and maybe drop a hint on your favorite ride.
Yeah, sure. Hello, my name is Jonathan Smith. I'm the Corporate Vice President of Rides and Engineering for SeaWorld Parks Entertainment, or SEA, as we like to call it. It's really great to be with each of you here today, whether it's evening, morning, afternoon, wherever everyone's at. Greetings from actually San Diego, California. That's currently where I'm at right now, my hotel room. My current role with SEA, I provide oversight of the design, development, fabrication, construction, and commissioning of all major attractions at our 12 theme parks in the United States. So you can say basically I'm involved in all SEA, new projects, major modifications, whatever you want to call it, from napkin sketches all the way through opening. A little bit of my history prior to working in the corporate office at SEA, I was very lucky to work as a project manager in the design and engineering department at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, or as we call it, the world's most beautiful theme park. Fantastic experience there, working on a large variety of projects there. Dennis, I love the fact that you have Ohio roots. I grew up in Ohio, born in Pittsburgh, but I spent a lot of time in Columbus, Ohio. I've been to Coney Island many times, and especially Kings Island as well. So it's cool that we share that connection there. Yeah. Favorite water ride, I guess one that's very close to home for me is probably Infinity Falls at SeaWorld Orlando. In my opinion, it's one of the best rapids rides in the world, and it's an enormous ride. There's two flumes on the ride. Usually when you think of like a rapids ride, it's one singular flume. There's two flumes on that ride, two separate flumes, 8 conveyors. There's a vertical lift. There's a downshoot. There's 5 distribution pumps. And if you think about each flume, if I remember correctly, it's been several years since we've opened up that ride, but I think it's somewhere 67 or 68,000 gallons per minute per flume pumping power that we energize there. And if you were to like calculate, if you think about that water flow, I mean, that's the water volume that could probably fill the size of an average residential swimming pool at your house in 7 seconds. So it's pretty amazing. And then I live in Orlando, Florida right now. So, people having homes or swimming pools at their house is pretty common. So I like using that data point and explaining how much water flow and how much volume we have there. Almost over 1 million gallons of water on that ride. It's a fantastic ride. I am excited to be here with everyone today, especially on this panel. Very lucky to be here. I have been involved in attraction development, probably in over 100 attractions at SEA, including several water attractions. So this is certainly a topic I'm excited to share with you and just kind of debate and talk through as we progress in this meeting.
Great to have you. And yeah, I can concur. Infinity Falls is quite a ride, a real soaker for sure. And yeah, the metric of swimming pools, I guess, is pretty relevant depending on where you are. Gerard, let's move to you. What's your history with water rides? And if you have a favorite, let us know what it is.
Yeah, actually, hello, everybody. My name is Gerard Posco. I'm actually the Corporate Director of Technical and Safety for VinWonders. Pretty much all their 6 properties. We have everything from a theme park, water park, aquarium, and safari actually in most of our parks. So it's pretty diverse in terms of the dynamics of the type of attractions we have. I've been with the company for about a year. And in terms of my history, in the theme park industry, I've actually been with the theme park industry for almost 20 years. I actually started in Sega GameWorks in Guam because I'm actually from Guam. And from there, I applied for Disney's California Adventure Park opening. And so that's how I got my way into Disney, as I helped open up DCA. After that, I spent pretty much about 7 years at Disney, between working at Disneyland and Disney's California Adventure Park. I also had the opportunity of working at Universal Studios Hollywood as well. And so the last couple of years, I've been working here in Southeast Asia, working in countries in Macau for Steve Wynn in Macau. I've worked in Jakarta, Indonesia, for a company called M&C, and now I'm here in Vietnam. So I've had the pleasure of working in, pretty much large portion of Southeast Asia, and I continue to love it out here. In terms of water rides, I would go back to my history working at Disney, having the opportunity to work on Pirates, on Splash. It's a Small World is at Matterhorn, so I think it was just having that opportunity, and also at DCA working on Grizzly River Run. I think it was just amazing to be a part of those water rides. But if I had to pick my favorite water ride, I'd probably say it's Pirates. And I think having going to Shanghai, I think that just took it off the roof. I just love Pirates in Shanghai. It's just amazing what they did with that water ride, and just so that to me is just the boundaries of how much you can do with water rides. So
Yeah,
Gerard, I
agree.
want to hitchhike on something there, if I might, Kelly. When we went over to the opening of Disney Shanghai, I was with some Disney guys and Universal guys, and we were in line to ride the Pirates, and we didn't know what to expect the next elevation would be. And we got on that ride. We went in and we were so shocked and amazed. When we got off the ride, we were like fifth graders in school. We ran back around, got in the queue line, and rode it again. It blew us away.
Yeah, that's also my favorite for sure. So when you said that, Gerard, your favorite was Pirates. I wanted to know if it was the original one at the park there, or the Shanghai one, which is my favorite. So great, thank you all for sharing that. So let's get a little bit into the history and sort of why we love water rides, why they became popular, and how they've evolved to help us with storytelling. So I'll move to Dennis, and maybe you can kick that discussion off there.
Yeah, happy to do it, Kelly. Thank you. Well, as I've always said for 5 decades, people love water. They want to be in it, on it, around it, and drink it. And we see that in our industry, and we see it around us all the time. People just love water. And I think as we look at the history of the rides and attractions, I'll take you way back for a moment. And I don't think a lot of people realize that there were water rides literally back in the 1890s, the Chute to Chutes and other rides like that, Tunnels of Loves, which I mentioned. But those go back to before the turn of the century, the other century, and people loved them. And there were the old mills, the Tunnels of Love, as I said, the Chute to Chutes, toboggans, and these rides really preceded the water rides that we know today and that came into vogue primarily in the 60s. I think one of the earliest based rides that really knocked our industry on its ear or set it on its ear was a aero log flume, and that was copied after literally the logging industry. What they were doing, riding and moving logs down chutes. And somebody had the idea, hey, wouldn't that be fun if we hollowed one out, put people in it, and took them on a ride in an amusement park? Weren't any theme parks or many at that time.
First innovation in safety, instead of riding on the log, let's put the guest inside.
So they hollowed it out, they scooped out, made some fiberglass logs, and they put it in, and it became an instant hit. Actually, the first log flume ride was put in Six Flags Over Texas back in 1963 by Aero, and it was certainly a hit there in that market. But really, what promoted the log flume and led it into prominence that it had for years was the World's Fair in 1964 in New York, and they put their log flume in there, and it was amazing. Everybody who went to the fair had to ride that ride. So from that, also Gerard, Small World previewed there at the World's Fair in 1964. So he had 2 very popular water rides, something we really hadn't seen a lot of, particularly in that kind of genre. So what the next real big impact of water rides came when Knott's Berry Farm put in their themed log flume back in 1969, and Walter Knott engaged Bud Hurlbut and his team to build a themed log flume ride, if you will, inside this mountain. And I can tell you that all of us in the industry at that time, we were all young kids, we all working in the industry around the United States and over in Europe, people came over to see that ride, and it was an amazing ride. So if you look at the number of rides that were built as a result of that, it was in the hundreds. And there were several companies producing those back at that time. And I'll just touch on this one more, and then I'll turn it back to you, Cal. After the log flumes came the Rapids River rides. We had to do something bigger and better. And the first Rapids River ride was introduced at Astroworld in Houston, Texas in 1980. One of the general managers there, a fellow by the name of Bill Crandall, he was working on an idea to make a wider channel, bigger boats, carry more people, give them more opportunity to splash and float around. And after that, the Intamin company who was working on that ride at that time, I think they sold over 175 of those immediately after that. So, and then from that came the splashdown and just the continued evolution of the water ride. So we've seen a long history. It's been over 50, 60 years of entertainment on rides in water. And as we're going to talk a little bit more here, we're not seeing that slow down at all.
No, not at all, Dennis. I mean, these water rides, they offer a really different and very unique experience that our dry rides or roller coasters or flat rides or dark rides can't really offer. And it's really interesting at our parks. You're talking about some of the history and some of the old aero flumes and the original Rapids rides. We do have some older rides at some of our parks. So we have a couple aero flumes, one in Williamsburg, Virginia, one in Tampa Bay, Florida. And then we have some older Rapids rides. And what's interesting, if you look at some of our parks in Florida, Virginia, and Texas, we'll have 2+ hour waits at these 1980, late 80s or early 1990s rides, shoot to shoot rides, Rapids rides, flumes, and it's amazing. So let's just disregard the new technology we have for new rides. Those existing rides that we've had for many, many years are still very, very, very popular. And it just helps with a very balanced attraction mix at your park. And you don't want to have just roller coasters or just shows or just flat rides. You need to have a very balanced and dynamic attraction mix. And in the summer months, that really, really helps with the guest experience and gives your guests something very different and unique to do versus the fall or their spring or even the winter months.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the popularity is off the charts in the summer, and that's what I notice, and that's what I line up for, in the hot months. But just back more to the historical element, and just how popular these rides are. Like they're part of pop culture actually. And when we were talking in the pre-meeting, something like Pirates, like that was a ride that inspired a movie that inspired a ride. Another popular tie-in to pop culture is the Jurassic ride. Everyone either knows the ride or the movie or both, and it's pretty amazing when you think about that. And I want to pass it to Gerard right now. I mean, Gerard, you've got some experiences with Splash and with Pirates, and how it's popular or with certain popular people coming through the ride when you were there. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I can remember. I mean, if you can imagine that, Pirates generated, I believe there was like 5 movies out of it, and every time that movie came out, every series that came out, our rides were just packed with guests, just wanted to get in there and just wanted to immerse themselves, and so that also proved challenging for us on the park side, because we also had to up our game in terms of with the animatronics, and we added Jack Sparrow. We even had a point where we actually had Johnny Depp come in and actually fill in for one of our animatronics, Jack Sparrow. So that, I mean, that's basically how vested even the celebrities were in terms of getting pirates where it needed to go. So I think, you know, I think really the evolution of having movies and having them help generate the popularity of these water rides is historical. I know for a fact, having worked in the park at Disney, we had even celebrities and professional athletes had rented out Splash Mountain for a couple hours just to bring their family in. And so again, that just shows the popularity of water rides, and you know how they really get you know, how guests really want to be part of it every time a movie comes out. I can tell you, interesting enough, here at Vin Wonders in Fuquoc, we have an aquarium, huge aquarium. I think it's the 5th largest in the world, and we have a so-called mermaid show in our aquarium, and with the anticipation of the Little Mermaid, just because it's, you know, so we have our water ride right across adjacent to our aquarium. So we have guests literally coming into our water ride first, then they go into our aquarium, and then now with the anticipation of Little Mermaid, everybody now can't wait to watch the Little Mermaid show. So it's just amazing how these movies have a spiral effect on how guests get attracted to the attractions. So I just wanted to make sure we shared that. I share that over here with you guys, because again, you can see the evolution of that. Yeah.
Hey, Kelly, if I can say one more thing, I'm
Mhm.
looking at you on the screen, and behind you that looks like a spill water. And I
Yep.
remember when we put our first spill water in at Kings Island, we thought we were getting the people too wet, and we had to come back in, design a new front for the boat that kind of pushed the water out. Well, that's not what the people wanted. They wanted to be soaked. And not only did they want to be soaked, we had a little bridge across where people loaded and they exited the ride, and they would stand on the bridge until the boat came down to be totally soaked here in our humid Cincinnati weather during the summer. So again, in it, on it, around it, drink it, and just be splashed with it.
Yeah, the splash bridges can be pretty popular too. I know in combined parks that I've been to where there's a water park and the water ride, you know, it's people taking a break from the lazy river or from the slides will gather on that splash bridge, you know, to get a big dose of that water, you know,
Yeah.
similar to a tipping bucket that you see in some of the play structures. But
Yeah.
that's great. Thanks for that, Gerard. We're gonna move to Jonathan now and talk a little bit about the development of water rides and how they fit with the ride mix in a park, and some considerations when you select a water ride for building a park there, Jonathan.
Yeah, no, thanks. You know, what I'd like to talk about is maybe the operator's point of view here, and the attraction development side of the equation here. And I can certainly understand from an operator's point of view why, you know, water rides might seem a little intimidating, especially if you haven't delved into one before. And even from like a capital spending or even planning or schedule perspective, water rides do have different requirements that need to be met from engineering, installation, and operation standpoints when you compare it to, let's just say, like a traditional roller coaster, an LSM launch coaster, or flat rides, or a kiddie park. And what I'd like to share from experience is the development time for a water attraction is really not that much different when you compare it to building like a medium-sized roller coaster or large roller coaster. And, you know, while I will admit that you know, there is a little more time required for, you know, some of the items like installation of ride concrete or water flow commissioning times on your flumes. But saying that, you know, usually there's less time required for ride erection or even electrical installation, depending on how many conveyors you have. And what I'd like to do is take some time and talk through like the differences between water rides and compared to like a typical dry ride, like a roller coaster. And, you know, I did briefly touch on installation, you know, from far away. This seems to be one of the main differences. That's when you look at a water ride and comparing it to a traditional dry ride. With the roller coaster, when you're pouring ride concrete for a column pedestal, it usually has embedded anchor bolts or anchor cages to it. You certainly follow a detailed survey process. You have to follow that to make sure that the anchor bolts are within the ride manufacturer's tolerances. So X, Y, Z tolerances, angle of the bolts, those kind of things. Those of you who have installed roller coasters know that. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And typically your tolerances are anywhere from like 3 to 5 millimeters, less than 1 degree in angle on your anchor bolts. But it takes a comprehensive survey process to get that right. And what you do is you survey pre-pour, during your concrete pour, so you have some flexibility and adjustability to make sure they're correct and in tolerance. And then you survey everything post-pour to make sure everything is in proper position prior to ride erection. If you don't follow that process, you're going to run into big issues when you're erecting something like a roller coaster. Now, in contrast, in the case of like a water ride, pouring flumes or ride trough concrete is really not that much different than anchor bolts on a pedestal. What you're trying to do on a water ride is you're trying to maintain flume invert elevation, so make sure that your slopes are correct from point A at the station to point B at the end of your flume. Probably usually if it's one flume, most likely going back to the station. You want to make sure your slopes, your cross-sectional areas are within tolerances. And what this means is if you do that correctly and you're surveying, pre-pouring concrete on your flumes during and after, your water flows, your velocities, your water elevations throughout your flumes, they're going to be right on and spot on. And it's going to make your ride commissioning process, when you get to that phase, much simpler. And you're going to have more flexibility from the manufacturer to get everything right. And so it's not that much different if you think about it. I mean, it's just how you do it is the same process, but what you're doing is just a little bit different. But it's ideally pretty similar. So that can be something that is intimidating to an operator from the very beginning if they've never done it before. But what I'd like to just kind of point out, it's really not that much different.
So sort of a little bit more forgiving in some areas, but your commissioning might be a little bit longer because of the issues with water and getting that just right.
Yeah, correct.
I think too, Jonathan, maybe you would support this, that in the early days of the flume rides, the rapid river rides, took a lot of power to generate those rides. It was a heavy user and had a huge demand on our electric bills and our cost factors. And I think that's gotten better too, hadn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Like I briefly spoke on some of our older rides. Like we have some older flume rides. We have some older rapids rides in our system. I'll give one example. Like one of our rides has 5 pumps for one singular flume that runs a rapids ride. It's one singular flume. And we used to run 4 of those 5 pumps at 60 hertz. So there were no VFDs at the time. That's how the ride originally opened. I would say seven years ago, we updated those pumps, and then we put in and we replaced the motor starters with variable frequency drives, VFDs. And so instead of running 4 pumps at 60 hertz each, we're probably running, I think it's 5 pumps at like 30 hertz, something like that. So there's a significant energy savings with the new technology we have with variable frequency drives and those kind of things. So it's certainly different than it was in the 80s and the 90s.
Well, that was a deterrent back then. I mean, we would look at that and we'd say, it's a very expensive ride to operate. So that's a great change, and that should help change people's minds in the futures too as they look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, sustainability is a hot topic these days, and modern technology in pumps has helped us become more energy efficient in these types of rides. Other things that we consider here at Whitewater is lost water. So evaporation is a concern, splash out is a concern. So trying to manage those to make sure that the rides are operating as sustainably and as energy efficiently as possible. While we're on the subject of parks and rides, Jonathan, do you have any comments on design for ADA? And this is another important topic for the industry. What have you seen in advances in designing for ADA or accommodating guests?
Yeah, so we've done a couple things, and it's not only water rides that we have in some of our newer attractions in recent history. What we have typically provided is what we call an ADA switch. We have them on roller coasters, and we also have them on some water rides. And really what this does, it's a lateral track switch, which houses our ride vehicle. It could be a boat, it could be a rapids ride boat, it could be a flume boat. And we offer it to be in a position off the main ride center line or a separate location for loading and unloading of guests. And it really just gives them, as much time as they need to comfortably load into the boat and unload into the boat. They don't feel rushed. And what's great from an operations perspective, it allows us to maintain our dispatch interval on our main ride center line, whether it's a turntable or whether it's a straight inline conveyor. And so it gives the guests great satisfaction. They can take their time, they can do what they need to do. Plus, you can maintain ride capacity, which makes the operators happy and the guests in line happy.
Yeah, those things are typically a bit of a hit to the budget up front, but I think the savings in the long term to your throughput and the ability for guests needing that assistance, not feeling rushed and having a great time at the park with their families, with everyone else, I think is important.
Absolutely.
Gerard, do you have something to add to the conversation about your experiences with water rides in an operating park? Some common. You're on mute there.
Yeah, sorry,
there you
I
are.
had a
No problem.
technical difficulty there. Sorry about that. I can go into Kelly. I can go into the next question about what I think speaks against water rides for some of us operators here.
Yeah, just some of the
And
pain points and your perspectives on that.
yeah, having being here in Southeast Asia, as you know, the tropical weather and the high humidity here, it doesn't fare well with steel. And obviously, the biggest fear that a lot of the folks that I work with here was having to deal with the corrosion. As you know, it rains here pretty much all the time, all year round, and coupled with the humidity, it doesn't help. So that was one of the points where they were a little bit worried about. And obviously, our technicians I have here were really used to working on water rides, so having to bring their tools out there and work on the water, checking out sensors and stuff wasn't something they were very used to. But I will say, on another perspective, from a training and troubleshooting perspective, I think both the operator and maintenance had real time with the new technology we have. We actually had real time visibility on the condition, of all the of the ride itself, having real time readings and trends on the water level sensors, speed monitoring on the conveyors, status on the pumps and motors, as well as being able to look at the speed and proximity sensors and various photo eyes throughout the ride envelope. And being able to have that kind of real-time access really helped a lot in terms of having the operators feel a little bit more confident in terms of being able to take on something like this. So um, I think, again, going back to my common pain points is really about the corrosion. So, as you know, trying to lubricate mechanical parts exposed to water has always been our challenge. We even had junction boxes that were NEMA 4 rated, and we still had some issues with corrosion going into the contacts. So again, that's just a constant thing, which is what I want to say, that you just got to stay on top of the maintenance when you're doing water rides, but it is well worth it. I think in terms of doing refurbishment work here in Van Wonders, our parks are open up 365 days of the year. So we pretty much have to phase out do our refurbishment in phases, just because we can't take it down for long periods of time. So we don't want to really impact our peak seasons. But again, that's pretty much the common pain points that I wanted to talk about. Kelly, is there something else you wanted me to?
Actually, Gerard, you had a good point there. You're talking about taking rides down for annual maintenance on a park that's running 365 days a year. One of the benefits we have at some of our parks in Texas and California and Florida, where we are running 365 days a year, we're open, is if you have, variety in your water rides, like different types of water rides in your park. So it's not as painful when you shut a flume ride down for 4 weeks for annual maintenance work, when you also have a water coaster or a flume ride or some other type of variation of a water ride that's also in the same park. And so from the guest experience standpoint, they have something to ride to get wet while the other ride is down for, 3 or 4 weeks for its annual maintenance cycle. I can understand it would be quite painful if there's only one rapids ride and that's the only water ride you have in the park. You do have to shut it down to do maintenance. You have to, so it's less challenging for the guests when you offer them another opportunity, something else to ride.
What about your parks in North America, Jonathan? How do you deal with the shoulder seasons in some of the places where it gets a little cooler? Do you keep the rides open?
We typically don't. Like I can think of Williamsburg, Virginia, where we have we do have a brief winter period. It can be 30 degrees, degrees Fahrenheit in the January, February months, and even March sometimes. And sometimes we'll have snow events, very minor snow events, but there's just not a large interest in those types of seasonal type parks that have different variations of seasons at those months. But then again, in May, June, July, August, September, it's extremely popular because it gets really hot and humid in Virginia. I've been told that Richmond, Virginia has the highest average wet bulb temperature in North America. And that's roughly 40 miles away from Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. So you would think Florida would be a lot more humid than that location of the country. It's not. So in the summer months, it is extremely popular to get wet when you're in our dry park there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had some conversations with some operators where, the shoulder season was a bit of an issue for them. So they would take out their water ride and put in another small family coaster, but the summer would come and their guests would protest, where's the water ride? So I think that decision needs to be considered very carefully, especially when you have a fervent fan base that really loves water rides.
Yeah, and if I can add to that also in terms of shoulders, we don't have that here in Vietnam because it's either raining or it's hot. But we are looking at dialing down the geyser effects during the monsoon season, just because we're looking at doing that for the ride. In terms of also adding in even dryers, because again, that's we have ponchos, but I think we've talked about also adding some dryers as well. I know some parks have those, and I think that's something that we're looking at putting in there just to help the guests get dry a lot faster. So there's little walk-in dryers. I think that's just something else that we're looking at as well here.
So Jonathan, you talked a little bit about some of the advancements in pumps and energy savings. Are there any other advances in technologies that you've seen in water rides or that you're excited about that are kind of around the corner?
Yeah, let's talk about something geeky like ride control systems. I mean, we used to use simple relay logic for ride controls for these old flume rides and rapids rides. There's been certainly huge advancements in the industry from a controls perspective on all kinds of rides, whether it's a dark ride, a roller coaster, but that includes water rides too. Is we're seeing safety PLC systems being provided for new attractions, new rapids rides, new flume rides, water coasters, shoot to shoot rides. Blocking systems, with safety rated, sensors, that are controlling the blocks and controlling the amount of boats you can have in a specific block, whether it's 1 or 2 or 5 boats in a certain area of the ride. We've gone through our parks and we've replaced our ride control systems on our existing water rides that are from the 80s and 90s and 2000s. And so we're running safety PLC systems and new control systems, variable frequency drives on our pumps. So we've kind of gone through and retrofitted all of our existing rides to make sure that they can last, another 20, 30 plus years. There's been developments in, restraint and containment, and that there's a lot of efforts going on in ASTM and EN, and just to name a few safety organizations in the industry. But the same developments we're seeing in containment and restraint design on roller coasters is certainly applying to our water rides. And I'm on the top of those conversations when we're developing a new product and doing the testing, and so there's a ton out there. Now, saying that, let's talk about some of the old rides, some of the orphan rides. We've kind of made a decision as a company to add some capital to make sure that these rides do last for another 30 or so years. A good example of what we did is at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. We have an old Aero flume ride. It's called Les Scoot. I think it was put in the park in 77 or 78. Don't quote me on that. But we've seen a lot of corrosion issues on that ride over the years. And so we went through a 4-year replacement program. It started in 2011, I believe, 2012, where we replaced the entirety of the flume troughs, the structure, the columns, the ride control system. It has brand new boats, new theming, basically revitalize and enhance the existing ride to make sure that it can last another 30, 40 years, because guests love that ride. It's an old ride, it's an orphan ride, but it's basically a brand new ride as it stands today, and it looks fantastic and it's extremely popular. And so that's for us, that's like a good case study for us. Like, you know what, we need to make sure that we keep some of these very popular rides and keep them running. And you have to spend capital to do that, but in the long run, the effort's worth it, certainly.
Yeah, we're seeing that a lot. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Gerard.
I was going to say, Kelly.
Jonathan's.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead,
Gerard.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to you, Kelly, just about the orphan rides. I think speaking a little about what Jonathan talked about, I think in terms of like here, Southeast Asia, we have some orphan rides, and we've been fortunate enough to find manufacturers that want to take it on. And one of the things that they've asked is just to make sure that we had all the proper documentation in place, like the latest drawings, technical manuals, what safety standard that we use, whether it was ASTM F24, EN 13814, or GBA 48, whatever third-party inspection, and NET reports, any safety bulletins that we had. That would make the transition a lot easier for these manufacturers to take on these orphan rides. But certainly, yes, I agree with Jonathan. I mean, if there's any way we can save some of these rides, because again, even though they were made on an older standard, they certainly have a certain appeal to it. So I think as long as you have the documentation and the capital, you can certainly save some of these orphan rides.
And they have a legacy. They have a place in people's hearts. Yeah. They remember it when they were children. Yes. And they want their children to enjoy the same thing they did. I think as a veteran, it's kind of fun to look at what's happening now. If I might, Kelly, just for a second, I went online the other day and I was looking at the new Power Splash mock ride that is put in over in Six Flags over Texas. Here's a back and forth water ride. It was actually conceptualized by an old friend of mine, Errol McCoy, who was one of the senior VPs and pioneers of Six Flags over 30 years ago. And this ride has now come into fruition. And you look at it, takes you up 125 feet, drops you at 60 miles an hour. You go back and forth backwards in the station. You have a double loading situation. And watching it online with the people that were riding it, they were having a marvelous time. Wasn't a long ride. But it was a great ride, and they had a great experience, and they certainly got splashed on that ride.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, there's debates around here. Do you call that a coaster, or do you call that a water ride? Right? There's a lot of coasters that dip into water elements, and on the other side, there's coasterization of water rides, like the Atlantis rides at SeaWorld. So it's interesting, this blurred line where these two iconic ride types are sort of merging in the middle. Have any of you been on a Power Splash? I haven't yet.
Yeah, I rode the one in Belgium when it first opened. It's really good. I mean, it's essentially the same ride in Texas, but it's fantastic. It uses linear synchronous motors to launch the boat. It's a turntable experience, so you're able to load, unload one boat while the other boat's on the right center line. And the splash is amazing. Like it's coming and you can't do anything about it. You're going to get wet. And it's a great off-board experience too for some of the guests. If you strategically design the splash to get you wet, you have to be careful when you design it though. You don't want your guests to be too close to the splash because it is a tremendous amount of force. So there is some discussions with the ride manufacturer you have to have in those kind of design discussions to make sure that you have the right positioning where that splash is going to be. But it's an amazing ride.
You know, they did a great job too on the marketing, Kelly, because they tied it in with Aquaman, their IP at Six Flags, their characters. So it really is a water coaster, and we'll see that ride now. We will see that evolve like we saw the Log Flume and we saw the Rapids River ride and these other rides. That will get bigger and better and do more things over the next 10, 15 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we touched on another point there that I wanted to bring up and get your views on is this notion of passive capacity. So sometimes you have people who, don't want to get wet, or there's grandparents in the group, and I find that water rides are a bit of a nexus or focus in the park. Everyone wants to come and see the next boat go over the hill and see the splash and not necessarily interact with it directly. But water rides tend to be a bit of a gathering place, and parks that do it right, they've got their seating and their food and beverage sort of gathered around that main lake where you can see the splash. Any thoughts about the placement and the passive capacity or the evolution of that over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for our flume ride over here in Fuquoc, I think there's a nice spot where everybody actually already has made its Instagrammable spot. And I think without us even actually finding a spot, the guest has already figured it out where they want to take their picture, and it's been the popular spot. So I think to talk about what you're speaking about, Kelly, I think also in terms of the interactivity, we have looked at putting water guns and other types of, so the guests that do not want to get wet and just want to watch these guys get wet would be part of that experience, and be using these guns, these water guns, basically to get the guests wet, especially if they saw that they didn't get wet. So like, oh, okay, you didn't get wet, I'm going to make sure you get wet this time. So I think that part of it, because there are a lot of guests that just want to watch it. They just want to stand on the bridge and watch it. They don't want to get wet. But I mean, it is our responsibility to provide those interactives.
Yeah, having the water
Whatever
toys, or sometimes we'll have push button activations for geysers and all sorts of water effects. It's that interactivity in real life kind of thing where you can inflict a little bit of a splash on maybe your friends or maybe complete strangers, and by the time they're off the ride, you've run away anyways. So yeah, it's an important part of the water ride experience, I think, is this notion of drawing others into the fun.
When we were back in the heyday, when we were building a lot of parks in the 70s and early 80s here in the United States, and we were laying out the parks, we always talked about it being akin, if you will, to laying out a shopping center. You put your anchors at the south and north and east and west. And one thing we always did in our parks that we were designing here in the U.S. and then later for ITPS as we went international, it was always a coaster, a water ride, and those were our anchors at the different points in the park at the outer places, because we knew, what did we know, Jonathan? They were going to go to those rides, right? And then we filled the park appropriately with our food and beverage and merchandise and flat rides and other rides along the way. So we maintained what you said earlier, Jonathan, the balance of the park. We didn't want it tipping one way or the other. So, but a water ride was always considered to be one of those anchors that we put north, south, east, west.
Mm-hmm. Just wanted to pause for a minute and let all the viewers know that the chat channel is open for questions. With about just under 10 minutes left, I'm going to pivot into questions. So we've got one here, and I'll ask each of you to take a turn on it. It's how do you encourage guests to ride a water ride in cooler climates? coming from the UK, I usually don't give them a second glance. I want to take that on.
Well, I'll say this. Typically, it's teens who will ride it. It's not the older visitors to the park. And something Gerard was saying earlier, during those cooler days in the parks that we were operating, we sold a lot of ponchos, and we brought those ponchos down to the queue lines and we sold them outside right there at the spot. So that was one way that we kept the effectiveness and the efficiency of the ride and maintained that capacity, because it would, even though it was cool, still be a busy day.
I think what you do in those environments is you focus on the experience. Like, people really want to experience something that they can't do at their own house or somewhere else, and at a social gathering. And I think our guests want to be immersed into an experience, something that's incredible. It's not just a roller coaster or ride steal. They want to be connected emotionally to the attraction. And so the better that you can do to create, really great theming and a great story and an experience, the easier I think it's going to be to have high capacity on those cooler months at that type of park. So like, I'll even admit, here in California, we have a SeaWorld park in San Diego, and during the winter and spring months, it can be pretty cool here. It can be, on average, 67, 68 degrees Fahrenheit. But we do have some really well-themed rapids rides and a water coaster at that park, and they do pretty well in the spring months, even though it is kind of cool compared to Orlando, Florida, or somewhere else in the world that's really hot normally. So I think just having a great guest experience and a great story and a great theme is one way to tackle that.
Well, I think those are great answers. Still waiting for questions to come in. We got a little bit of time. I wanted to get your thoughts on how you think what we're seeing in new technologies globally are going to affect water rides. So VR and AR has sort of been out there for a few years, and now with AI, do any of you have any thoughts on how these new digital technologies will affect water rides?
Well, I think it's going to have a huge impact, just like the technology is in the rest of our industry on the dry rides. And we're seeing it in lighting. We're seeing it, as you said, Kelly, in the VR and the AR. And your company's been working on that for a while now in the water parks and in other areas. And I think it's just homogenizing those technologies with the experience to get a story and to get I'll say it again, an experience that makes sense to what the theming and the activity of that ride is. So I think the way we've seen technology advance in the last 10 years, particularly in the last 5, I think we're going to see a lot more of that come into play in our water-based rides. And I think it's going to make it more exciting for the guests. And I think the operators are going to want to get on board with that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Gerard. Sorry. No.
Oh, sorry. Totally agree with what you said there, Dennis. Again, we started out with animatronics, but now with video projection, you can really just, the sky's the limit with your content. You really can, take it to the next level with the media content, because again, with video projection, you can do so many things with video projection. So having that in a water ride, I think really is a game changer. And so again, I can't say it enough. Technology is going to help these water rides get to where they need to be in terms of the guest experience.
Hey, if I could mention one thing for the operators in the room, I mean, we're talking about new technology. I mean, our industry is growing at a tremendous pace. Everyone in this panel understands that, and a lot of you here understand that. And it is a challenge to stay ahead of the curve to generate new ideas, fresh ideas, especially for water rides. And so with Kelly here from the manufacturer standpoint, I mean, from an operator's perspective, it's very important to stay in tune with our trusted vendors. And whether it's a ride manufacturer or it's another consultant, like Dennis, that we need to work close with those types of individuals and maintain strong relationships and develop a sense of transparency. And if you do that and you do that well, you're that kind of operator to the manufacturer, you're going to put yourself in a position where you're going to see a lot of those new ideas, fresh new ideas, sooner than later. And so that would be my recommendation to you for the operators in the room is make sure you develop that trust, maintain strong relationships with the vendors. That has helped us go a long way, at least especially for me in my career. So that's something just to stay in tune as we're talking about new technology.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah, well said, Jonathan. I think that's a great point for us to wrap up on here. Got a few minutes left, so I just wanted to thank you all for being guests on this webinar. It's an honor to be able to sit down and speak with you about these things. If the viewers have any other questions, you can certainly find me on LinkedIn or through the Whitewater West webpage if you want some more direct answers. Yeah, I think this is a great discussion, and again, I can't thank you guys enough for being our guests here. So.
Kelly, keep in mind, we have to continue to push the envelope in our industry safely for our guests, operators. If we're out of ideas, we're out of business. And for the last 60 years, we haven't been out of ideas. We can see it continues on. So it's something that keeps us all alive and young in the business and excited about it.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Yeah, have a great day or evening wherever you are. Bye now.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.